Good afternoon for the Chinese side and good morning for the European side. I think it's time to start our seminar. So yes. I would like first to give the floor to Director Márton UGRÓSDY to start our session. So thank you everyone, and Márton, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victor. First of all, good afternoon and good morning to everybody in this call. It's a great pleasure to have this event co-organized in cooperation with the China-CEE Institute and the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences in Beijing. We're still on Zoom. I'm very sorry for that, but obviously travel has been still pretty much restricted. So we have to wait a little bit until we can meet our partners somewhere, either in China or in Europe or in between. But we're very much looking forward to the physical meetings once again. And until that, we're glad that we can meet here on Zoom. The topic we're going to cover today is related to EU-China investment relations and having a look on the European and the Chinese perspective. And first of all, if you look at the numbers, we see that partly due to the pandemic and the overall uncertainties in the economy, Chinese investment in Europe has been dropping in the last few years. After the 2016 peak of 44 billion euros, last year we have seen Chinese investment worth of 6.5 billion euros. But obviously, as the world economy has been facing a lot of uncertainty and lots of challenges, we do understand that this might not have been the best season for investment for all the countries. On the other hand, if you look at the geographical distribution of Chinese investment in Europe, we do see that there is a bit of diversification going on. And by that, I mean that Chinese companies are now not only interested in investing in France, Germany, and in the UK, and we all know that because of Brexit, the amount of Chinese investment in the UK has been dropping because market access to the European Union is not available anymore. But we do see that Central and Eastern Europe, which is also part of the 17 or 16+1 cooperation, has been featured more predominantly if you look at the relative share of the European regions in Chinese investment. Of course, we should bear in mind that the overall amount of Chinese investment is lower. Therefore, the share of Central Europe might be not as high in absolute numbers, but I think this is an important message because it shows that Chinese investors are now focusing a little bit more on Central and Eastern Europe than they used to before. And I think this pretty well connects to the topic that we're going to discuss today. If we talk about investment, I think we should bear all the associated political risks in mind as well. As you around this virtual table know much better than I do, the EU-China relationship now has a political dimension as well, a political dimension which is not free of the influence of outside players. And if you look at the European interest, I think it is important to look at what Europe can gain from this relationship and not necessarily focus on what our friends and allies want us to do, sometimes against our own interest. So I do think that there is a need for a rational and evidence-based debate on the China-Europe investment and trade relationship, which is rooted on facts. And I think this session today and the panel discussions we're going to cover today will offer an excellent opportunity for this kind of fact-based discussion. I'm not suggesting, of course, that we should leave the overall political situation aside because that's impossible. Everybody who's dealing with the EU-China relationship now has to face an environment which might be not so friendly to the topic. And therefore, I'm very grateful that we were gathered, the experts around this virtual table today, because there's a great amount of expertise on both sides. And based on that, I do hope that we can have this kind of rational discussion that both sides need in order to suggest some solutions how to resolve the situation we're facing right now. And I know that also on the European side, we're seeing some kind of investment screening mechanisms. We are hearing voices which are calling for a more, let's say, assertive European stance vis-a-vis China. I think we should leave this aside, at least for this discussion, and focus on the facts, focus on what we have on the ground, focus on the common interest, and also highlight some of the differences we might have, because that's also an important part of the equation. But I think we shouldn't overemphasize our differences, and we should also focus a little bit on what connects these two major players of the world economy. And with that, I think I'm going to conclude. Thank you very much for all my colleagues and also the colleagues at the China-CEE Institute who have been instrumental in putting this event together today. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much. And Victor, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Director UGRÓSDY. And now I would like to give the floor to Director Feng Zhongping, who is the director of the Institute of European Studies, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. He is also the president of the China-CEE Institute, our co-organizer. Thank you. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, all the people on online. I realized, although we couldn't see each other face to face, but there are more than 40 people participating in this dialogue. So it's very important for us to have some kind of communications. If we couldn't do this physically, I think it's important to use this chance to online to express each other's views, reach some kind of understandings if possible. Today it's important, today I just received an interview. It's about Chinese foreign minister is having online strategic dialogue with his counterpart from the European Union. This is something, it used to be very regularly because of the pandemic, because of the, traffic restrictions. So this sounds like very important news between China and Europe in today's situation. The topic today is I agree with our previous speaker said, it's very important investment. As far as I understand, China-Europe relations in past decades was focused on economic issues, have been focused on trade. Increasingly, investment becomes more and more important. So that's why at the end of last year, two sides made great efforts to conclude the long March negotiation, 7 years hard negotiations on investment, on this so-called agreement on investment. You can imagine, agreement like this in normal situation, it takes a lot of efforts. So, which means not just conference to conference. It's actually a lot of talks would take place in the coffee bar, coffee room, restaurant. But last year, they did this through virtual contacts, through video discussions. So that was an incredible job they have done. We are talking about today, how to think about, evaluate our investment. Let me just make a couple of points to share with all the colleagues, both in China and in Europe. I think, some kind of trilateral relationship has already emerged. Trilateral, I mean, US, Europe, EU, China. We are three largest economies in the world. So, in other words, European relations with the United States, Chinese relations with the United States, European Union's relations with China. These three bilateral relations is most important bilateral relations in this world. But increasingly, when China and the European Union have concluded the CAI, this made the Washington DC very upset. This is interesting development. When China and the United States, under Trump era, launched the trade war against China, Europe was upset. Europe was extremely, their situation was not very good at all. When the United States and Europe is getting close, think about a couple of months ago, Joe Biden, the new president of the United States, made his first ever visit as a president to London, to Brussels. People in Beijing is eager to know what they was going to say about China. That is why I think, now there is a bilateral or trilateral relationship, China, Europe, and the United States. Why CAI, Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, is so important? As far as China is concerned, I can tell you, trade economic relationship is so important in our whole bilateral relations. But during the past years, the increase, this relations also has caused many problems by both sides. Europeans make complaints about what is their business environment in China. Chinese entrepreneurs was describing their situation was getting not that good in Europe. So the frictions in the trade investment areas has already there. And as I mentioned, trade investment is the core of China-EU relations, China-European relations. So this has definitely has some negative impact on the whole relationship. This is why two sides decided we must reach some kind of agreement in this area. This is why CAI is so important. The problem now we are facing is, I hope I agree with our moderator, we need to think about, make some proposals to solve the current situations, break the deadlock, if you like. Because of the sanctions and the anti-sanctions between the two sides, China and Europe, European Union. So the CAI was frozen now, has been frozen. And if you look, ask business people in China from Europe, European Chamber of Commerce in Beijing, if you ask these people, they really want to say this treaty agreement was enter into life. If you ask governments, capitals in Europe, I don't know what the parliament's views, because parliament normally has diverged different views. Maybe at the moment the majority was not happy about to ratify this agreement. They think the situation is not ready. It's not good to approve it. But if you have a chance to ask individual member states, including the Commission itself, you may got a impression, you know, a lot of people want to see this being implemented in the near future. So, so that is our starting point. What Chinese side can do, what the European side can do or should do, not just the Parliament, but also member states, and also European institutions based in Brussels. We need to really think, you know, what steps, what measures we could take to solve this issue. I think this is the most difficult one, but it's also the priority. The German government, the Merkel's government, had made great contribution in pushing this negotiation. But by the election 1 day ago, Germany is in a long process. I hope it's not that long, but obviously it need a couple months at least to establish a coalition government. So their focus was obviously internal one. At least during this transition period, you cannot expect too much from the Berlin. Berlin, as I mentioned, played a great important role before in China-EU relations, in China-European relations, especially in this CAI, Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. So what capitals, what governments, what people should you really talk to seek the solution on this critical issue? I raised the question. I really expect people in this room on the line can help us to make some contributions to solve this issue. I want to say thank you to everybody for participating in this discussion, and also look forward to hearing your constructive views. Moderator, I stop here. Thank you so much.
Director Feng, thank you very much for the opening remarks. And in the opening speeches, both Director UGRÓSDY and Director Feng, both very important aspects. So I think it will be what to talk about today. So there will be several important things we have to discuss today. So thank you again for your valuable thoughts. And I think it's time to start our first panel. The panel will be moderated by Péter Goreczky, who is a senior analyst at the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade. So I would like to invite Péter. The floor is yours. Thank you again.
Thank you, Victor, and good morning to everyone from Europe, and good afternoon to the colleagues from China. My name is Péter Goreczky. As Victor has mentioned, I work as a senior analyst at the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade. And I think our keynote speakers have already introduced today's topic, so I don't want to take more time with that. And I will start introducing our panelists without any further delay. And I know that ladies should come first, so I apologize, Ms. Schüller, that I will follow the order given in the agenda. So our first speaker will be Dr. Fan Cui, who is a professor at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. He's also the director of research at the China Society for WTO Studies. Our next speaker will be Marcin PRZYCHODNIAK. Please excuse me, my Polish pronunciation has not improved so much recently. He is a China analyst and a senior fellow in the Asia Pacific program of the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Dr. Zhongping is a professor at the Institute of International Economics at the Nankai University and also a senior research fellow of the Center for Transnational Study and Apex Study Center, also the Nankai University. And last but not least, as I've mentioned at the beginning, Dr. Margot Schuler is a senior research fellow at the German Institute for Global and Area Studies. And before passing the virtual floor to our first speaker, just one technical announcement from my side. We hope that we will have some time for Q&A session following the presentations, and it was the request of the organizers to manage this via using the chat function of the program. So if there's a question from the floor, please use the chat function and address me with the question, and I will share at the end of the session some questions, if we have some time for that, with our panelists. Let's start, and our first speaker is Professor Cui. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you. Thanks to all organizers for having me in this interesting event. My topic is a comment on China-EU CAI, and I would like to make these comments by emphasize two important principles, which are competitive neutrality and ownership neutrality. As we know, although the China-EU CAI has met some difficulties at the moment, however, we still think this agreement is very important. For the perspective of the Chinese side, we have made some new commitments, such as the commitment on market access and some commitment on state-owned enterprises. In the agreement, they are called covered entities. And we have also made some new commitments on labor standard and environment, which are all very important commitments. In the meantime, as we know that at the moment, China has applied to join CPTPP. The standard of CPTPP is very high, and it can be the target of China's further opening up and reform. Especially the rules on state-owned enterprises in CPTPP are more stringent than those in China-EU CAI, and especially there are some new rules on so-called new commercial assistance, and these kind of rules have made more disciplines on subsidies, especially to the state-owned enterprises and the designated monopolies. And the rules on labor and environment in CPTPP are also more stringent as well. But as far as we know, the Chinese government is very serious on the application to join CPTPP. That means those very stringent rules, very high standard rules are not unreachable. And China is making the efforts to try to meet those high standards. I think the very important point, a very important implication of China-EU CAI is that in this agreement, we have found some rules related to the principle of competitive neutrality. There are some new rules on state-owned enterprises. Actually, China had never accepted or joined the negotiations on those rules in free trade agreement negotiations or bilateral investment treaty negotiations. And this is the first time for China to accept such detailed disciplines on state-owned enterprises, which means that actually I think Chinese government are going to accept and actually recognize the basic principle of competitive neutrality. One point I need to emphasize that today, what I'm arguing is totally my personal argument, my personal point of views. I'm not discuss these problems on behalf of any organizations I'm affiliated with. This competitive neutrality principle, the concept started from Australia and has been widely accepted by OECD countries. And recently we have seen that EU has stressed this notion in recent position paper on WTO reform. And this concept actually, I think, has no conflict with China's direction of market economic reform. But in the meantime, we also need to recognize that there's a WTO tradition of ownership neutrality. The ownership neutrality, according to a report issued by OECD in 2013, WTO rules are generally ownership neutral. The disciplines which they impose with respect to government regulations and actions do not distinguish between situations where the provider of the goods or services covered by the regulation or action is a public or private entity. That means actually, in practice, we should not discriminate public-owned entities as well, right? We should not give any advantage to state-owned enterprises, but we also should not discriminate public-owned entities, just like state-owned enterprises. And some authors argue that the ownership neutrality embodies the basic principle of international law that each state has a sovereign right to freely choose its own political, social, and economic system. Okay, China is a socialism country, and the public ownership regime need to be respected, especially according to Chinese law. And some other authors name this principle of ownership neutrality as ideology neutrality. And actually, there are two interesting and important examples I would like to mention, which can embody this principle of ownership neutrality. This idea can be best illustrated by especially Article 345 of the Treaty of Function of the European Union, and especially this actually formally as this article has already appeared in the Treaty of Roma, Article 222, and it's very long time ago. It's just starting from the 1950s. Okay, the article states that the treaties shall in no way prejudice the rules in member states governing the system of property ownership. And I think another example can be found in the China-EU CAI. And actually there is also similar articles in CPTPP and some other international agreements. In CAI, it says that nothing in this article shall be construed to prevent a party from establishing or maintaining the covered entity. That means a country just like China, if we establish or maintain a state-owned enterprise, there's no problem, okay? I think in the recent book published by two trade specialists, they argue that the solution to the problem posed by China to the international trading system is not to demand a change in its economic regime, but to induce a change in its economic behavior. Okay, I don't think there's a problem posed by China to the international trading system. The international trading system has its own problem, and it's not China who boycott the appointment of the pilot body members. But in the meantime, I think I agree with these two authors at the point that if we want to reach a good solution, okay, the other WTO members, including EU and the US and all other countries, should try to make some rules on economic behaviors rather than trying to change the economic regime in China. It's impossible, actually. So I think the future world trade and investment system need to have uniform rules, because we are competing in the same world, in the same international market. We should have uniform rules. But in the meantime, this system needs to be inclusive. It should be, suitable for developed countries and developing countries as well. It should be able to, accommodate a country just like China, which is a socialism country. I think the uniformness of this system can be achieved by competitive neutrality. We can have uniform rules on economic behavior. But in the meantime, the inclusiveness of this system can be achieved by the principle, by following the principle of ownership neutrality. Different countries with the system of property rights, different system of property rights, they should all be respected. Okay, just like Article 345 in EU's agreement. Okay, such a system can be acceptable to most countries, and including China and EU and other countries. And actually, it has no conflict with China's own fundamental economic system. To achieve such a system, there are several points I would like to stress further. One is that I think both principles should be followed. We should not stress one without respecting the other. Okay. And the second point is that the devil is in the details. We should not hide discriminatory articles, stipulations under the name of the principles. Negotiation will be difficult. We need to have to do hard work to negotiate on the detailed rules to fully reflecting the two principles. And the third point I would like to emphasize that the system needs to be overall balanced. If the industry subsidy rules are extended to the fields of services and investment, just like the so-called non-commercial assistance rules, we should also seek to just like discipline the agricultural subsidy, and we should not keep the countervailing measures in the fields of services and investment autonomous, right? We have some new rules, new subsidy rules in the new areas. We should have new countervailing measures rules as well, right? We cannot just argue that, okay, we have autonomous rules to impose this kind of countervailing measures. In the meantime, in these new fields, the subsidy rules are becoming more and more stringent. And the last point I would emphasize is that I don't think a separate plurilateral negotiation on competitive neutrality and the subsidy is a good choice. It's not a good choice, because we cannot expect some people, some countries are disciplined by these rules, but other countries are not disciplined. And I think the good point of the CII is that when China accepted some new rules, we are getting something. If in the negotiation we cannot get anything, but just accept some more stringent disciplines, I don't think that kind of negotiation can be successful. That's all my personal point of views. Thank you very much. This is references, and thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tsui, for sharing your thoughts on the, let's say, the various dimensions of neutrality. And next we are going to hear, to listen to a Polish perspective. So, Marcin, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. Okay. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to speak to you all. My presentation, or I would rather say a few observations on the China-EU relations and the Chinese investment and the investment relations. They mostly focus on comprehensive agreement on investment, and as I titled it, is actually the end of it, which I would follow on this later. First, I would like to start with saying that these 7 years of negotiations by European Commission with China on the agreement, it has been quite a interesting years, and the situation changed rapidly, and the mandate the European Commission received to negotiate in 7 years earlier hasn't been modified within these years. But the relations, and especially the China situation, dramatically changed, especially since 2012. And that we have to have it in mind while we talk about the actually conclusion of CEE. But let me start first with saying what is CEE and what is in CEE actually. And the PISM, Polish Institute of International Affairs, has conducted recently a report on and analyzed the agreement itself and what it actually includes. So let me first start saying that it was mainly concluded due to the determination of German government, which wanted to score diplomatic success while holding the presidency of EU Council. We have to remember that a couple months before the conclusion of negotiations, there were very serious signals from European Commission that there will be no finalization, and there's lack of progress in negotiations, and we shouldn't expect the finalization before the end of 2020. And then suddenly, boom! In December, we have the conclusion. So that was the determination of German government with a clear political support from France, of course. Germany, of course, was interested in keeping economic opportunities with China open, while France sought to demonstrate the union's growing political clout. Both countries are, of course, major investors in China. Because we have to also remember that while the agreement is supposed to change a lot for European investors in China, actually it does not change a lot, but I'll get into that. But on the other hand, it doesn't really have much in common with the situation of Chinese investors in the EU. They actually have almost all the possibilities they need currently without the comprehensive agreement on investment. Secondly, through agreeing to certain concessions and without legal instruments included in CEE for the EU to guarantee the implementation of the agreement itself by Chinese authorities, EU companies may be in difficult situation if CEE is ratified, and they decide actually to invest in certain sectors. China, when we have to acknowledge that China treats bilateral economic relations through a political lens, and the political perspective is actually something which is far more important here if we talk about CEE than the economic one. But I'll get into that in the end, while I'll say why actually I believe CEE is frozen and will probably never be ratified. And then with increasing economic power, China exercises the growing capacity to exert pressure on foreign governments. And this could violate economic agreements that we could recently see in the case of Australia. CAI leaves out an investment protection section, and the EU member states' bilateral investment treaties will remain applicable. The 2-year deadline to finalize the investment protection section is toothless. There are no real incentives to bring the parties to the negotiation table. And also due to the limitation of the enforcement mechanism, it is very unlikely that CEE in the current stage will provide effective protection against unfair regulatory competition with respect to ILO standards on forced labor, freedom of association and collective bargaining, as well as environmental standards. CEE and ratification, if happens, will also not provide decent protection and is weak on reciprocity, which, as we all know probably, was the main argument behind starting the negotiations by the Commission to actually receive a real reciprocity in terms of the possibilities to invest in China, and the possibilities to invest in EU, which actually Chinese companies already have. China has additional tools for modifying the conditions on the ground according to its own interest. We believe we all know that. So the unpredictability in doing business in China might even increase. We can actually see that going on right now towards Chinese companies on the ground, with the raising level of the party control, the new regulations being forced upon the Chinese big tech companies. That's all going on, and why it shouldn't be applied to European companies. Even CEE does not provide any kind of protection on that. The key issue is, of course, the dispute settlement mechanism, but it is incoherent in CEE, in current CEE, and does not guarantee comprehensive implementation of the agreement. And still, even if there is a dispute settlement mechanism, it still might not prove sufficient. Large investments are difficult to withdraw instantly, and under pressure from Chinese authorities on different topics might be unwilling to report violations and discriminations out of fear of retaliation that might constrain their access to large Chinese consumer market. So first, if the EU needs to put in place autonomous measures to defend European interests vis-à-vis China before ratification, any kind of ratification of CEE. And this should include the international procurement instrument, a ban on the import of products of forced labor into EU markets, human rights due diligence legislation, measure against unfair subsidies on the basis of the EU's white paper from June 2020, the mechanism against economic coercion, and an enhanced investment screening mechanism. Because, as I said in the beginning, the political issues are far more important here if we consider EU-China relations, even if we talk about CEE. Because why CEE is frozen right now, and why I believe there is no certain opportunity or possibility to actually put back the ratification process and actually ratified. It is because of the political reasons. It is because of the obviously practically because of the sanctions that China put on the members of European Parliament and the research community in Europe. Because of legitimate research on human rights violations in Xinjiang. That's the main argument. And without reduction and without canceling the sanctions, there's actually no opportunity in the European Parliament to actually start the ratification process again. And we have to remember that within the EU's decision-making process, the European Parliament is crucial here. You will not get ratified if European Parliament does not agree. If we look at, of course, there is a possibility of some kind of not a pressure, but influence from the member states countries. But if you listen to almost all the member states authorities currently, they are simply saying that without any Chinese move on sanctions, there is no possibility to start any kind of discussion on further ratification of CEE. Even you have SPD and CDU in Germany after the elections and during the campaign, they were simply speaking, even if of course, their interests are rather in ratifying or not in ratifying the agreement. But during the campaign, you could easily listen to them speaking that Thai is dead currently because of the sanctions. So, and because of the political situations, because of China's actions, Chinese policies towards the EU, towards the member states, and obvious controversial issues between the EU and China, which most of them are political, not economic. And so, to get to the end of my presentation or small speech, what I do have 3 suggestions which could make the ratification easier. Although I do believe, as I presented here, that the Thai in the current stage, in the current phase, is not something that is valuable from European perspective. And it needs, as I said, first EU needs to put some autonomous measures against the defendant's interest. But still, there are 3 decisions, 3 actions which could speed up the process or help the discussions to go on. First is, of course, as I said, is China needs to cancel the sanctions on MEPs and researchers. Without that, there is no discussion on the future of Thai. Second of all, there needs to be a ratification of ILO conventions of forced labor for China, which was put in Thai not specifically, but it is also an important agreement. And third of all, there needs to be change in the offensive diplomacy towards some EU member states by Chinese officials. This trend of which we could observe quite recently, in 2020, in 2021 also. It also does not help in keeping the relations between EU and China positive. And to finalize, I mean, one general statement, we did see it in 2020 with the pandemic, and we need to take it into consideration that although the investment relations and trade and investment relations between EU and China are something which needs to be discussed, but we still need to think about the dependency issue. But we did see it during the pandemic that the dependence that EU in general, but more specifically Germany, France, Italy, they do have, their economies have on Chinese market and our relations with China is not very healthy from the EU's perspective. And sometimes and we can see that in the EU's thinking, EU decision-making processes, that the reduction of this dependence needs to be is an important issue right now. I know I said it was the last one, but I just have one thing concerning the US factor here, which of course I think was very, very important from Chinese perspective to finalize Thai in this current set of time in December 2020, right after or right before President Biden taking office, but right after the elections in US, which helped China to consume it politically on the international stage to show that the EU and China are cooperating rather than staying in rivalry. But as we can see it now, and I can agree that EU-US relations are not the best as they could be, but we do clearly see a quite good cooperation on certain issues. We will see a cooperation tomorrow, right? When the EU-US Trade and Technology Council will have its meeting, we'll discuss cooperation on chips, on AI, and with clear perspective on this dependence on China and threats that are coming from China. The EU and US will clearly have it in mind during the discussions in Pittsburgh, if I'm correct, tomorrow. And of course, the global gateway, the Indo-Pacific strategy, recently the growing relations with Taiwan, these are all factors and symbols and policy actions that are actually showing that the EU is quite interesting in raising its individual independent policy in cooperation with US, but also in considering the possible dependencies on cooperation with China. And I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcin, for formulating this explicit opinion. It was very interesting for me to listen to your arguments why the CAI will probably not be ratified. And I would be very interested to hear the opinion of our last two speakers in this respect. So maybe Dr. Feng and Ms. Schüller could respond already in their presentation to Marcin's opinion. So Dr. Feng, the floor is yours, please.
Hello, moderator. Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this conference. Let me share the PPT with you. Where is it? Let me try and find my PPT here.
院长，请打开你的那个视频。盛斌院长，
我现在看不到。I'm sorry. Okay, let me start. The topic for my presentation is China's PIT and FDI policies. So far, there are 146 the BIT for China, according to the UNTAD data. 108 BITs are in force. 20 BITs have been signed but not in force, and 18 Chinese BIT has been terminated. Now China has concluded the 36 BIT with the OECD countries, except United States and Ireland. China has released the template for bilateral investment treaties in 2012. So before the China concluded BIT with EU, the modern or frontier BIT is the China-Canada BIT. Now China are facing the challenges of how to modernize the BIT based on the guidelines and the practice of recommended by the international organization. The most of the first generation of the BIT has concluded before the 1990s. It includes some traditional elements related to foreign investment, such as foreign investment access and establishment, ownership and equity, performance requirements, investor treatment, capital transfer, confiscation, dispute settlement, investment incentive, and so on. But since the 1990s, there were great changes for the content and cross of the BIT. This is what we call the second generation of the BIT. It has include many more modern elements, more social issues related to FDI, such as the investors' obligation, corporate social responsibility, investment facilitation, IPR, competition policy, labor markets, acquisition of the land, environmental policy, public governance and institutions, anti-corruption, ISDS, infrastructure, and the PPP and so on. So in the China's current BIT in force, there are a small number of the BITs which conform to the second the modern generation of the BIT, such as the China, Canada BIT, China, Switzerland BIT, and the new China-EU BIT. The China's development of the BIT has a great meaningful impact on the domestic legislation of FDI policies. On March 15, 2019, the new foreign investment law of the People's Republic of China was passed by the National People's Congress. It came into effect on January 1st, 2020. The newly issued foreign investment law will end the era of the foreign investment controlled by the outdated laws and show the world intention of the China to further open its markets to the world. So the new law, the new FDI law, makes tremendous changes to the current FDI legal regime. The first challenges is a combination of the three laws. The law have replaced the three older laws issued at the very beginning of the China's open door policy, namely the PRC wholly foreign owned enterprises law, the PRC Chinese foreign equity joint venture law, and the PRC Chinese foreign contractor joint venture law. The second change is the principle of the equal treatment for both domestic and foreign investment. The new law provides the state will apply national treatment and a negative list to the pre-establishment of the foreign investment. For the fields of the foreign investment that fall outside the negative list, the principle of equal treatment for both domestic and foreign investment will apply. The new law will also provide that the business forms, structures, and the rules of activities of the foreign invested enterprises shall be governed by the law, by the company law of the People's Republic of China, the partner law of the People's Republic of China, and other subordinate legislations that apply to domestic entities. In other words, there should be no any special provisions on the business form, structure, and the rules of activities of the foreign invested enterprises. The third challenge is about the investment promotion and the protection. Under the foreign investment law, the foreign invested enterprises will benefit from the national policies that support domestic enterprises business development, participate in government procurement activities through fair competition, and raise the funds through issuing stocks and corporate bonds. The new foreign investment law will also allow the foreign investors to freely remit certain funds into or out of China in RMB or any other foreign currencies, which has always been the major concern of the many foreign investors. The protection of IPR to IP also plays a key role in the foreign investment law. The technical cooperation carried out freely will be encouraged, and the monetary transfer by administrative measures as well as the non-disclosure provisions imposed by the administrative authorities or its officials will be prohibited. In spite of those achievements in the China's FDI legislation and implementations, there are still some concerns from the foreign government and foreign investors. So there are still some new rules for improve China's new foreign investment laws. The further reforms in these areas are very expected. The first area is about the investment liberalization. Liberalization of the China's investment regime is not insufficient. There are still continued some application of prohibitions of foreign equity capping, joint venture requirement, and other restrictions in certain sectors. Now the China have released her annual negative list. The latest list include 33 areas, but there still leave some restrictions in number of the areas important to foreign investors, such as the key service sectors, agriculture, certain extractive industries, and certain manufacturing industries. Especially, there are some restrictions or prohibitions in the service sectors, such as the cloud computing service, telecommunication service, film production, and film distribution service, the video and entertainment software services. The second issue for the further reform is the licensing requirement. That means even for some sectors that has been liberalized, there are still some potential for licensing requirements or application of licensing process. So it should be make some difficult for the foreign investors to achieve the meaningful market access. This is some concerns. The third area is about the national security review mechanism. Like the mechanism in other countries, the review mechanism also needs to be more clear. The government and the FDI authorities should also make more clear implementation guidelines. In these areas, there are special concerns for the China's the cyber security. There's many debates and arguments between China and other foreign countries in the areas of restricting the cross-border data flows and imposing the data localization requirements. The final issues is about the technology transfer. That is the great debate between China and the United States when the US launched the 301 investigations. The foreign countries are complaining that the Chinese government officials make condition the investment approve on requirement that a foreign company should transfer technology, conduct research and development in China, satisfy the performance requirements relating to exploitation or the use of the local content, and make valuable deal-specific commercial concessions. So I think it's not not fair to criticize the China's measures in all these areas. There are some some national interest or reasons to maintain some management and supervisions, but considering the trend of reform and the other the foreign commercial interest, China may make some positive response or related reforms to these areas. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Schenk, for sharing all this information about how the FDI regime in China is shaping. And last but not least, I will pass the virtual microphone to Dr. Schiller from Germany. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the invitation. Now I try to upload my presentation. Just a moment. So, yes, where is it? Okay, then I hope you can see that. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. Okay, my topic, relevance of the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment for Europe. There is ample evidence that removing trade and investment barriers can work at the advantage of both sides. And I think this is the most important point I would like to make. And we are large trading partners, the EU and China, and it's quite natural that we look for sort of regulation for agreements, how to best reduce the barriers of trade and investment. And looking at this table, you can see how important China has become as a trading partner for Europe. In terms of EU exports, now China has a share of 10.5%, and it's the largest partner for EU imports with a share of 22.4%. It's very important. But looking at the investment stocks held by the EU in the world, we see that China only attracted 4% of total EU stock of investment worldwide. And we can say that this is a very small percentage and remains small compared to the size of the Chinese economy. And why is this the case? So we argue that the OECD shows that as well, that there are high barriers facing European companies investing in China. And one indicator is the FDI restrictiveness index, showing that China, even in 2019, has the highest barriers for foreign investors. If we look at the stock of European FDI in China and China's FDI in the EU, we see that there has been some increase on the side of the Chinese, some catching up. Chinese companies invested about 117 billion euro in the EU, and European companies 148 billion. So the figures always change if you have different kind of sources for your tables. And over the last 10 years, we can see that Germany has become an important target for Chinese companies, especially in high-tech companies in the field of machinery, automotive, and electronics. And here is the table you might all know. It's a distribution of the Chinese investment across European countries. And you see that in the period 2000 to 2018, the most important investment for Chinese investors were the UK, Germany, Italy, and France. But the problem is how much really Chinese investors have invested in Germany. It depends on the sources you have, because foreign investment is divided into greenfield and mergers and acquisitions. And for those different kind of investments, you have also different kind of statistics. And looking at that graph, you see that, for example, CEE, this is the M&A data bank, is very conservative in terms of the growth and the development of Chinese investment. While, for example, the American Enterprise Institute is very strong in terms of increase, but the trend is obvious in all these statistics that there's a decline in Chinese investment in Germany, and we can discuss the reason for that. Let's have a short look at the M&A transactions declining since 2017, and it's currently, in terms of the number of M&A cases, it's equal to the investment in 2013. So the problem is really, why is this a case, and will it continue? Maybe one note here, the industry focus of Chinese subsidiaries is matching the Chinese trade or the German trade relations with China. It's focused on machinery, automotive, and electronics. Here, this shows that China is important as a greenfield investor in Germany, but comparing Chinese activities with other countries' activities, you see that, for example, the US in 2019 has more than double the greenfield investment in Germany than China. And if you look at the importance of China as an overall economic partner for Germany, we can look at the trade statistics, and here in 2020, China was the #1 in terms of German imports and #2 in terms of German exports. And total investment, here is just a number by the end of 2019. German companies have invested about 90 billion euro in China, while the stock of Chinese investment in Germany is about 3.7. So it is still a sort of asymmetry. In total, we have about 32 joint ventures set up by German companies. But I think over the last 10 years, the number of joint ventures reduced. Now, the companies prefer to have their own wholly owned companies set up in China. M&A transactions are limited over the period 2004 till 2018. You only have 5 M&A transactions, like transactions by Siemens or by the Deutsche Bank, the Allianz, this is the insurance company, Bosch or Fresenius in the health sector. The number of transactions is quite limited due to the restrictions in China. This is the main reason for that. So let's put these points together. I think that the CEE offers new opportunity for both Europe and China. And this is not only empirically based comment. I think we have to improve access to the Chinese market for European companies. And this could contribute to a better level playing field. When we started the negotiations 7 years ago, there was a very strong asymmetry in terms of getting access to the Chinese market by the European companies. And now this new agreement had the opportunity, the potential to reverse this trend. And this is especially important for German companies in the automotive and e-mobility area and in the service sector in general. And as some of the other speakers have mentioned, there are a lot of new rules, for example, regarding subsidies in state-owned companies, labor rights. This could contribute to a better transparency. And there's also another point which is often not mentioned. I think for the Chinese side, there's also a lot of motivation to have this agreement, because dealing with about 20 or more individual EU member states in investment relation is a sort of a transaction cost, very strong transaction cost. You have to deal with them. You have to have this arrangement for each country. So if you have an EU-China investment agreement, this is much easier and brings about an easy entry into the European market. And I think what is most important about the CEI is that it can establish a higher degree of certainty and accountability in the investment relations. And this brings about trust in the relation of the two countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Schiller, for sharing all these statistics. It was interesting to see what trends are going on in the economic relations between Germany and China. And I congratulate all of our speakers because we could keep the time frame. And now we have, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes for a very brief discussion. And as we haven't received so far any questions from the floor, I will monopolize on my position as a moderator and I will start the discussion. And I think a perfect starting point for that would be what Marcin has formulated in his presentation, as he highlighted that in his opinion, in this whole CAI story, political issues are far more important than economic issues. And in his opinion, because of that, the comprehensive agreement on investment will most probably not ratified at all. I would be very, very interested to hear what our Chinese experts think about that. But anyway, I address with this question Dr. Schiller as well.
Shall I start? Or what?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. I think there is also one point which needs to be mentioned. We have this situation of decoupling, and in the future, I think the EU investment agreement might not be that important anymore because, or maybe are important more than before. It depends on the perspective. Because we will have this decoupling going on, and we will have the need for companies to build their own ecosystem in both China and the United States. So how to tackle this challenge, I think, is the most important for European companies.
Thank you. Dr. Tsui, Dr. Sheng, can you comment this?
Okay, I would like to say something. The first is that I think the CAI is mutually beneficial. It's beneficial to China and the EU as well. But if we look at the articles in the agreement, we can see that actually Chinese side has made a lot of new commitments. The new commitments made by the EU side actually is limited. But I think for Chinese perspective, I still think the CAI is very beneficial to China. It can link China with the European countries to actually maybe reshape the whole Euro-Asian continental value chain. And the so-called opening up to the East actually is very good direction of opening up to China, and it will be mutually beneficial to both sides. Actually, if we look at the Chinese opening up process and the FDI inflow to China, last year, the FDI inflow in China increased by more than 4% in the pandemic, actually. And China has becoming the #1 host of FDI in the world, more than the United States. And actually, in the first half of this year, China attracted the inflow of FDI in China increased by astonishing rate of 33%. by the year-to-year measurement. And the inflow from the EU actually increased by 12%. According to a recent opinion business confidence survey by the European Chamber in China, 60% of European companies actually are going to expand their business in China, which is the highest rate in the last 8 years. And the companies who are going to relocate in the business outside of China, that rate decreased to 9%. This is the lowest rate in the history. Okay, although there is a pandemic going on, 73% of European companies in China actually profited last year. So I think the increasing and opening Chinese market provide a good opportunity to European businesses. And actually, in the end of this year, I think China will publish the new negative list of FDI. And I expect the FDI restrictiveness index mentioned by Mark just now, actually it will be decreased further. Actually, in the last several years, that restrictiveness index has decreased a lot. At the moment, actually, China's restrictiveness index is even low than New Zealand, a developed country. And I expect a further decrease in this restrictiveness index. And I think the economic benefits of CII is huge. But in the meantime, I also agree with our European colleagues. The political situation, the political factors sometimes is more important. If the European sanction to China cannot be lifted, it's no way for Chinese side to lift the anti-sanction, okay, to European side. So I think this is a deadlock. It needs the two sides to negotiate, to solve the deadlock with patience. And I think all the European countries, especially our European colleagues from Eastern Europe, you also have a history to trying to working very hard to keep the peace and the unification of your own country. China is facing such problem as well. We have a Taiwan issue, okay, it's still unsolved at the moment, and we are trying to keep our country unified and keep our country peaceful and with economic development. So the starting point for us to do that is to make the political situation in China stable. Okay, so that's what I would like to say to our colleagues. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tsui. Dr. Sheng, would you like to react on this question as well? If not, then please, Marcin, go ahead. I can see that you have raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Just one comment I should probably say, because we keep saying about how CEE is beneficial for both sides. We need to remember that it's just the text of declarations currently, right? These are mostly declarations. It's not like China decided to do something to open more. These are not decisions, these are declarations. And as I said before, the current text of CEE has no investment protection section. This still has to be negotiated, and we don't know when, we don't know how. And of course, the dispute settlement mechanism included in CEE is very inefficient. So if we keep saying that it will help the European investors to enter China, I should rephrase maybe. If we keep saying that China agreed to open up more and allow more investors in certain sectors, we should probably add that it declared its openness. It's a declaration. And we can see from, and of course, and we keep, I don't know if we keep forgetting about this obvious distinction between state declarations and party authority, which is right, the obvious issue in China. And we could give up a lot of examples when actually declarations are not put into practice because of the party's interests in China. I mean, Australia, I mentioned Australia, right? I mentioned, I mentioned big tech. I mean, these are all examples when, how to say it, even if it's in a legal text, even if it's an agreement, it still can be changed because of the current political interests. That's what I'm supposed to say. So please keep in please keep in mind that still CAI is nothing more than declarations. Thank you.
Thank you. I can see that Dr. Tsui wants to respond that. So please.
Okay. Yes, the CAI at the moment is still at a very early stage, but if we want to look at the process of opening up of China, I think the example, the index mentioned by Margaret just now is a very good indication. And actually, in the last, if you look at the OECD FDI restrictiveness index, in the last 7 or 8 years, from 2013, that index has been increased a lot every year, actually. And at the end of this year, we will see, I think we will see more opening up. For example, the equity restriction, equity share restriction on car making industry in China will be lifted totally at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, I think. And this will be very good for those car making industry, car making companies from Europe. Another point is about investment protection stipulations. I think the reason why the CAI has not covered that investment protection articles is not because of China, it's because of the EU side, because those kind of articles, they are so-called the joint authority issues, I think. It needs to be approved by states, and it will take a long time. But I think, especially for China side, we have the intention to negotiate on that. And we expect the whole process can be relaunched. Thank you.
Marcin?
Yeah, just I don't want to change it into my conversation with our colleague, but I just yes, I agree. I do agree that this was not included mainly because European Commission did not want to get the agreement, did not want to get the agreement ratified by all the member states. They wanted to keep it the ratification process within the EU institutions. That would agree, but the question is why? An answer is somehow connected to your first part of your statement about the car industry. That's the obvious interests, and I can understand that there are countries in Europe for which the agreement could be beneficial, and it's Germany mostly. That's obvious. I mean, and we already said that the negotiations were finalized because of the pressure from Germany and France too. So that's of course, but we have to keep in mind the whole European Union's interest here, not just some of the member states. I know there's a question to me, but I don't know if you're supposed to answer right now. Or...
do you mean those questions that we have received via chat?
Yes, I mean...
Just 1 minute, I would like to ask Dr. Tsui whether he wants to say any or add any comment to that.
I don't have any further comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for both of you. And as Marcin has indicated, we have received altogether 3 questions. Every of them is addressed to Marcin. So because we are just about to run out of time, I will select maybe the last one. Is the EU in the position of strength towards China to force internal political changes there by economic coercion from the EU?
Well, it is a question with a statement included in which I don't agree with. I don't think EU is any kind trying to force China to change its internal policies. It's just trying to keep China to its international law obligations and the human rights standards, which both sides agreed to. For example, in the UN Charter, both sides are a member of European nation, and these are obvious. So I think you are referring to the issue of sanctions put by European Union because of the obvious violations of human rights policies in Xinjiang, and these were not economic. If that's what you're referring to, I don't see any kind of trying to force China to change its internal policy. I mean, I think I just answered the questions. It's an obvious and quite natural behavior in the bilateral relations between EU and China. And the EU is trying to keep China to its obligations, which China has under the international law.
Okay, thank you, Marcin. And I think it's time to wrap up this first panel discussion of today's online event. I would like to say thank you to all of our panelists for accepting our invitation and sharing their thoughts on this very, I think, very complex topic. As far as I know, there will be a 5-minute interval break for refreshments and stuff like that. So thank you again. And we are going to go on with the program in 5 minutes. So stay with us. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Victor, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Good morning to European colleagues and good afternoon to our dear Chinese participants. It's my honor to host the second panel discussion. My name is Zhongping FENG. I'm a junior research fellow at Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and from this year, I'm also the project manager at the China-CEE Institute, which is an independent think tank founded in 2017 by Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, aiming to strengthen the cooperation between European and Chinese academics. As a student of philosophy, it's very interesting to view the Chinese and the European colleagues to face the same question for both, and from the different ancient and historical wisdom. Now let me start the second panel discussion. Firstly, let me introduce the first speaker, Professor Márton UGRÓSDY, who is from Institute for Political, Social, and Economical Studies. In the past years, Professor Márton UGRÓSDY published many books and essays on European social, political, labor culture, and industrial democracy. I believe Professor Márton UGRÓSDY will give an excellent presentation for us and share with us his latest ideas about EU and China investment question. Please, thank you. The floor is yours, Professor Márton UGRÓSDY.
Thank you very much for this great opportunity, and my best compliments to the China-CEE Institute and the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary. The first session gives a lot of elements to reflect about the dimension and the perspectives of investments and trade. And I would add some framework concept, because we are living a very contradictory period. From one side, we see that a lot of geoeconomic and geopolitical tensions are increasing, and sanctions, new form of projection, and so on. But from other side, we see that all the states cooperate in common platforms. And the most important common platforms is that of sustainable development. That means the creation, the setup of a new economic order, and passage, a shift from quantity to quality of development. So let's reflect on this fact, this contradiction of our time. And in my view, we must put more attention on the common platform, where the confrontation among different policies and the commitment for the new economic order is shared by all the states. We forgot that the investments policy and trade has to make a reference now to this new sustainable platform. And I add that we know well that this platform make a reference to the agenda, 2030 agenda of sustainability, that all the states are committed to implement this agenda, and that this agenda now is under a sort of acceleration process. So more and more all the plan of the states go in this direction. But what are the implications of this fact? That means that the states have to confront themselves with the policies, decisions, plans, programs, and so on. They must create a new type of governance, and they must create a new public-private partnership. The rules that we need for investments and trade are coming from this new governance system. This is very important in my mind, because implementing sustainability commitments means cooperation. So now we must start from this point. And if we take this point as reference, we understand better the difference among the approach of different states to new development models, and we can understand better the others. We can base the cooperation on a more solid basis. The building of new sustainable order means that we have to balance more the competition with cooperation. These are the 2 points of reference: to balance competition and cooperation. And this is the first passage we have to keep in mind. Second, going more deeply in the new this commitment for sustainability, we understand better the difference among the strategic mind of different states. For instance, we forgot and we don't pay attention to the fact that, for instance, European Union has in the new policies, directive, new norms, new laws, link sustainability to the concept of competitiveness. If we read the documents of the European Union, we see that they say, okay, I want to accelerate the process towards sustainability, but creating a sustainable competitiveness. So I go in the direction of sustainability, but in terms of stronger competitiveness. So the European Union has given a really innovative interpretation of the concept of sustainable development. And in the documents, we see clearly that all our industrial system must be changed. One generation needs to be involved, but we have to change completely our way of production, our way of trade, and so on, to make investments. So if we go inside this platform, we understand the mentality, the type of approach of European Union to the new policies. They link sustainable development to a completely renovation, transition, green and digital transition, a completely renovation of our productive system, involving all the industrial sector, productive sector. And they link, I repeat, the concept of sustainability to increase of competitiveness of European system. From other side, if I go to read the documents, the official document that China has sent to United Nations, I read the text here explicitly in the national plans that every state send to the United Nations. I read clearly that I read this passage. China's remarkable achievements in implementing the 2030 agenda are attributable to the strong leadership of the Communist Party of China, to the advantages of socialism with Chinese characteristics, and so on. So if I go to see what kind of approach have China to sustainable development, I understand clearly that I'm facing with a socialist model of capitalism. And this is very important. When I want to design the new rule for investment and trade, I must have clear the difference in the approach that every state has. China make reference to a socialist capitalist model. European Union make reference to a different idea of sustainability linked to the idea of increasing competitiveness. This is very important to have a clear idea in your mind what type of approach that all the states have. And it is important because in the same time, all the states are going in the same direction. To understand well what kind, how to balance competitive cooperation, I have to add another element of reflection. We have seen very good statistics about the exchange, investments, foreign investments, and so on. Okay, there is a competitive and cooperation based on the exchange of goods and services. That is the so-called hard cooperation. We put a lot of attention to the hard cooperation, but we don't have enough attention to the so-called soft cooperation. That means the exchange of the confrontation of cultural values, ethical values, social aptitude, and so on. So all the immaterial values that orient the life of people and communities. we have to balance more the two elements. Hard cooperation from one side, well represented in many statistics that we have seen in previous session, and the soft cooperation that is where we have less attention, less knowledge element. But the soft cooperation is a key element how to approach different system, to how to create bridges among different systems. And I have in mind the quotation of a very famous economist, the founder of ordoliberalism, Wilhelm Röpke, a German in the 30s, who said always the success of free market with the marvelous game of exchange of goods and service is played outside the free market. That means in politics, in culture, in ethics, and so on. So let's work on the common platform that we have at disposal. Let's link cooperation to a more balance between hard cooperation and soft cooperation. Third aspects I want to suggest. Our economic institutes use very often the classic economic approach, but now it's time for in our orientation to recover the institutional approach, because every system is following formal and informal rules, the habits of thinking. So the institutional approach gives us more possibility to understand well the difference among the system and how to build bridge and how to build harmonized common rules. An example that we see going in this direction that is very important in our mind is the role played by the multilateral development banks. The multilateral development banks are defined the engine of development. They are supporting national plans, private investments, infrastructure investments, and so on. The multilateral development banks have created a sort of international network really oriented to sustainable development project, to support sustainability in this period. They still have different type of approach to sustainability. For instance, the economic dimension or social dimension, environment dimension. What is social? Social is assistance to the people, or it's to support the cohesion of a community. Environment is reduction. What is environment? Clean water and reduction of emission, or is preserving the ecosystems? So still now these questions are open on our table, but we see that the multilateral development banks that I repeat are engine of development have designed, have created a sort of network that is very, very important to orient the private investments. And for instance, the Asian development banks has just finished a consultation to adapt the assessment model. So these are tools very, very important to take as a reference, because if we follow the idea of the new governments and the new public-private partnership, we have to we have the possibility to understand what kind of rules we have to follow in the next future. So my recommendation go in this direction. The operative models, I'm going to conclude, the operative models have to be linked to the idea of solidarity. We are facing structural exchanges linked to pandemic crisis and sustainability new strategy. So new structural change are creating a very, very new situation. One example that we can follow, it's inside the G20 coordination, where both European Union and China are represented. We shall have in Rome the summit at the end of October. Dealing with the digital economy, the question arises since 3 years, just from under the Chinese presidency, what is digital economy? And the OECD illustrate there are many different definitions about digital economy. So they design a roadmap to have a common, a shared definition, a shared approach, and a shared investments, shared rules of system of rules for investments and trade. Allora, this is an experience step by step that is started 3 years ago inside the G20. It is a good example how to proceed in the coming future. Ecco, my suggestion is, I summarize and close. Let's work on the common platform for sustainable project. Let's have clear ideas about all implications of this strategic choice. Let's build rebalance competition and cooperation, and let's start to balance the terms of cooperation with between the hard aspects, that means exchange of goods and service, with the soft aspects. Let's take the example of cooperation of multilateral development banks as a model of reference, and the practice of G20 concerning the roadmap of digital economy. These are very good examples in which we understand the difference between different systems, the different approach among the different systems, and they can facilitate to create a better quality system of rules for investments and trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Litcheri, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. I ancient wisdom to show how it is possible to keep balance of competition and cooperation in EU and China. Next is I'm very happy to introduce my colleague, Professor Liu Zuokui. He is a senior research fellow and the deputy director of the Institute of European Studies, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. He is also the Secretary General of the China-CEE Think Tanks Network and the Vice President of our institute, the China-CEE Institute. His main interests include Central European Studies, Balkan Studies, European Union integration, and he has a very rich experience in Central Eastern European region. Welcome. Professor Liu, the floor is yours.刘老师，到你讲话了。
我知道，我因为一共享就看不到那个东西了。稍等一下啊。Hello everyone, I'm so glad to meet you online, especially Victor. After one day we meet again, and best friend Marcela, also Peter, Ninad, and a lot of friends, new and old. I'm so happy to meet you on this special occasion to talk about the Thai. Also Marcin, my Poland friends, to discuss some interesting topics. Today, my presentation is on Thai and the transatlantic dialogue on China. Now I will share the PowerPoint with you. Moment, please. For moderator, can you see clearly of my PowerPoint? Okay. My PowerPoint. Firstly, I would like to explain my key points on this topic. The first is that Thai is not only the result of a bilateral interaction between China and the EU, but also the result of a trilateral interaction between China, EU, and the USA. The second point is that Thai is not only influences bilateral relations between China and the EU, but also heavily influences the trilateral relations between China, EU, and the USA. The third point is that whether Thai is successful or not, it should be more considered from a trilateral perspective. The not least point that is does not follow that the closer transatlantic coordination, the less successful to the Thai. Later, I will explain in detail about my point of view. What is the meaning to China for Thai? I think there are at least 3 points. The first point is that the Thai concluded on December 2020 is a deep, comprehensive, and high-level investment agreement between China and the EU. It's very important for us, for China. The conclusion of the agreement shows China's determination to promote a high-level opening up, helps to promote the construction of a dual circulation strategy, and further improve the allocation of market resources and market-oriented reform. So you think that it's not only an external pact, it also oriented our inner market, our inner system, our inner reform. The third point is that the agreement is of great significance to the sustained and in-depth development of China-EU relations, safeguarding the external environment for China's reform and development, and promoting globalization, free trade, and multilateralism. So Thai is very important for China, and China's external environment is heavily relied on the market, foreign regulation, and foreign relations. What is the meaning to the EU? Maybe you can read on the EU's official website, but here I will list some key points. First, I think is provide for new opportunities and improved conditions for access to the EU and the Chinese market for Chinese and EU investors, and also address key challenges of the regulatory environment, including those who related to the transparency, licensing, and authorization procedures. Also, it will establish guarantees regarding the treatment of the EU investors in China and of Chinese investors in the EU, including protection against the unfair and inequitable treatment, unlawful discrimination, and unhindered transfer of capital and payment linked to investment. And also, it will ensure a level playing field by pursuing inter alia non-discrimination as a general principle, subject to a limited number of clear defined situations. So this point, I think the fourth point is very important to both sides. The EU try to seek a level playing field and a transparent and non-discrimination treatment with China. Also, the fifth point is that is to support to sustainable development initiatives by encouraging responsible investment and promoting core environment and labor standards. And I think it's a relatively difficult task for China, but it is EU's main target to pursue. Also, the last point I think that is allow for the effective enforcement of commitments through investment dispute settlement mechanism available to the contracting parties and to investors. So you can see that EU have so many levels of meaning to the EU to promote the CEE. It's not only unilateral beneficial to China, it also will give EU more opportunity, more sharing with the Chinese market. Also, I think that CEE is a very important test to transatlantic relations. The agreement has become an important win-win for examining the trilateral relations. Maybe you can find that the negotiation of the agreement is closely related to the process of transatlantic cooperation, which shows the consensus and even the differences of European and American policy towards China, and sets of the prospects of transatlantic cooperation with China. Later, I will show the logic why CEE is attached to the transatlantic relations and not limited to the bilateral relations. Here, you can see that CEE have different meaning to Europe and the US. Since it's very different to Europe and the US, this shows that different consensus, different concerns of this agreement. For the first time, for the first part, I think that the demands of the US and the EU in many aspects of economy and trade are similar. This is moreover, this is important factor that which will make the EU and the US try to cooperate to deal with China, because they have so many similar with each other on the trade and economic issue towards China. That is part of the ongoing negotiation on the agreement with China in Europe is also what the US needs to do, which is mainly reflected in requiring China to improve market access and increase trade reciprocity, strengthening intellectual property protection, also eliminating forced technology transfer, prohibiting high-tech and information technology theft and espionage, reform of state-owned enterprises, and etc. So they have so many consensus on the trade and economic issue towards China. This is a good foundation to promote them to coordination towards China. But at the same time, they have so many differences. Because I find that the negotiation of the CEE also reflects the difference between Europe and the US. The core issue is whether Europe and the US can benefit simultaneously. This is important. Whether it benefits the same also is benefited simultaneously. If Europe takes the lead in making a breakthrough in the negotiation, it means that the US faces losses in the Chinese market. Because of lack of coordination, the US and the EU still face the risk of being divided and ruled in front of interest, and may lose more asking power to China due to lack of unity. Then I will see the logic of Tsai to trilateral relation. I will list 3 points to this logic. And the first logic, I think that the history of transatlantic China dialogue towards China shows that there are differences in the policy approach of US and the EU towards China. I think this idea is very clear, and many my think tank friends know and realize that in dealing with China's rights, the position of the US and Europe are similar, but there are also great differences. The US believes that China is the primary competitor of the US in the future and must be contained. So USA will keep its first status in the world. He will try to contain any second status country. In history, it also have successfully contained the second followers in the world. So China also faces a similar fortune. The EU does not believe that a strong China will inevitably conflict with the interests of the West, as long as it integrates into the international rule system. It can still coexist. So this is totally different. EU is still thinking that China and EU could coexist in many aspects. But generally speaking, from a geopolitical point of view, the US think that China's rights will make them less coexistent with each other. Secondly, the interest promotes EU to seek accelerated cooperation with China. This logic is very interesting because you can find that in 2020, the US reached the first phase of economic and trade agreement to obtain professional market access for American entrepreneurs in China. This has substantially damaged the interests of European entrepreneurs in China. The agreement has seriously disturbed the market order and the interests of European enterprises in China from the European perspective, and promote the review of whether the agreement reached between China and the EU violated the provision to WTO. I know this process. I heard this story, which means that the EU is very concerned of US's unilateral action towards China. They didn't want the US to disturb the Chinese market through a regulated trade and investment agreement with China. US reached an agreement with China without negotiating with Europe. I mean, the first phase of economic trade agreement is typical unilateralism against the background that the trade and investment agreement between Europe and the US, TTIP, cannot continue. Countries such as Germany and the most large European multinational corporations support the Tsai, believing that it is a good way to gain the first opportunity and make up for the losses. So you can see it's very interesting because the TTIP is temporarily over. The EU tried to find the opportunity to sign the contract with China to get the first opportunity to find the more market share in China. Here there is a very clear map to show the logic that you know that in 2013 we started the China-EU negotiation. In 2008 we started the China-US started BIT negotiation. Also in 2013 the EU-US started the TTIP negotiation. But this is no problem. They have different starting point, starting time to negotiate the agreement with each other. But the key turning point is that in 2016, EU-US temporarily stopped the negotiation due to Trump, due to US administration, the reason. So in 2017, the China-US stopped the bilateral investment treatment negotiation. These two important events forced the China-EU to accelerate the Tsai negotiation because it seems that the other two could not achieve any concrete result. So they must find another opportunity, another market share exchange between China and the EU. So you can see that the US-EU negotiation or exchange has accelerated or promoted China-EU to reach agreement, to conclude the agreement in 2020. So I also want to repeat the above point that the US strategic adjustment had an impact on China and Europe. Trump's trade policy is to take a non-discriminatory treatment towards China and the EU, which had promoted the two sides to restart and accelerate the stalled negotiation. Europe sees China's market opportunity and the importance of its own strategic autonomy. The US is difficult to become a reliable partner in many fields. China also sees that after the continuous tension with the US, China's cooperation in developed markets should focus on the EU. China and the EU have accelerated the negotiation of the investment agreement. This is the logic. Because the US, China, US, EU stop the negotiation, which forced China and EU find that there are very rare opportunity to find. So they promote them to negotiate the treatment as soon as possible. The prospect, I want to say prospect, there are also two judgments. One is American is back. There are so many statements that America is back, but back is not so easy. The potential of disagreement between EU and US is not easy to deal with. The transatlantic coalition will make the deal more difficult. You know that the EU and US has so much consensus, but also they have so many differences, which make them very difficult to keep all the time consensus, consistent with each other. Why? Let's just take an example. The EU and the US still lacks no consensus on how to share the market access to China. This is very important, which influences the efficiency of the coalition on China issue and even WTO reform. I have found that due to this still lack of the consensus on Chinese market access, they have to postpone the end of the year dialogue on WTO tariff negotiation, which shows that this difference for some time has made a very important very important troubles to transatlantic dialogue on China. Thank you very much. This is my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Liu. It's very thought-provoking ideas. Thank you again. Next, I'm happy to introduce my dear colleague, Victor Esther Ha. He is a senior research fellow from Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade. His main research areas are the cultural characteristics of Chinese foreign policy, the relationship between China and Europe, and the non-Western schools of international relations. His topic is about economic and political aspects of the comprehensive investment agreement from a Hungarian perspective. Victor, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So thank you very much, and thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, in my presentation, I would like to focus on a member state perspective, but I can promise you that this is not just an egoistic perspective, because at the end, I try to also figure out, or I try to highlight that this is not just a Hungarian specific issue, what I'm going to talk today. So my research question in a nutshell is that why Hungary is unconditionally supporting the implementation of CEE. This was probably the most articulated, the best by the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade, that freezing the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment process goes against the interest of Europe. And so this is a very clear message that, at least on the side of the Hungarian government, Hungary is not interested in stopping this process, and therefore we can argue that Hungary is unconditionally supporting the implementation of CEE. So my question is focusing on that whether this is a political or an economic decision, or how can we judge this, and why is the Hungarian position is interested in this complex relationship regarding the problem. So if you ask most of the foreign observers why Hungary is unconditionally supporting the implementation, they would say, yeah, because Hungary has a very specific relationship with China. Hungary has probably the best political relationship with China currently. And therefore, many scholars also argue that Hungary, in many cases, also undermining the united voice of the European Union toward China. And this is, of course, a specific case because on the highest level, there was an agreement between, or at least from the Commission side, there was an agreement between China and the European Union. So therefore, it's natural that Hungary is supporting also the Chinese interest. Of course, I would say maybe it has something in it that Hungary is providing, again, a favor to China. But I think the picture is more complicated, and we need a more sophisticated explanation for this situation. The second factor which can come to the observer's mind is that Hungary has a very specific relationship with Germany. And as Professor Schuler argued, there's a lot of German interest in implementing CEE. So therefore, Hungary must have a position in this relationship, and this must have an important effect in how the Hungarian position in this matter was formulated. So in the next step, I try to make a very short overview of Hungary's position within the so-called German centralist European manufacturer core. We can identify Hungary, and I also highlight not just Hungary, but many of the Visegrad countries, Romania, Slovenia, even Austria, as a kind of a dependent market economy, because we have an extremely high share of one major actor in our economy, and this is the European Union, especially Germany. So major share, or lion's share of our trade goes to the European Union, and Germany has a very special position within it. And many of the FDI is also coming through most of the German manufacturer companies. So therefore, we can argue that the region is mostly incorporated into the global value chains by the so-called German Central Eastern European manufacturer core, which technically has three major elements, at least from the European side. So at the top of it, there are the so-called global companies, which are mostly big German brands, like the Volkswagen Group. They have access to the global markets. They have access to the global capital as well. So they are globally competitive actors. There are also mid-sized producers in Germany who are specified in some key technologies, which makes these global value chain, these German value chains more competitive globally. And the bottom of this cooperation are the Central Eastern European countries and also Hungary, who are providing low-cost labor force to make the products more competitive globally. So this value chain makes a key player in the European economy, and of course will be a key player in CEE. In order to understand the Hungarian position about CEE, this is very important to investigate. And where is China in this complex relationship? From one point of view, China is now is also a major market. So just to recall, I have data what I often cited is the sales of the Volkswagen Group. In 2019, the biggest market for the Volkswagen Group was China. Volkswagen Group sold more than 4 million cars in the Chinese market, which is bigger than the share of West Europe. So it's easy to argue that from a Hungarian point of view, this is also very important what is happening in China. And therefore, China is also in this complex relationship as another factor as well. China is providing a major source of the import, which is incorporated as a semi-final product produced by Hungary and transferred through the German Central Eastern European Manufacturer Corporation. So from this regard, China is a key key player also in this relationship. And in many cases, we do not simply able to identify this in statistics because in many of our import is not directly coming from China, but through the German value chains. Many cases we imported from Germany. Germany, of course, is a key import partner of Hungary. 1/4 of our total import comes through Germany. And also we exported via Germany and other countries to the global market as well. So China in many cases is not so visible, but China is there. And in order to understand that why is this value chain or this cooperation is still globally competitive, is that it also emphasize that China has a major role in this cooperation. So there is a general statement what we often buy in this part of the region, that what is good for the German automakers or manufacturer sector is good for the Central Eastern Europe. So if we are searching for a more sophisticated reason to understand what could be the Hungary's position regarding CEE, we have to keep this in our mind. But I agree with Marcin that the case is more complicated. For example, for Central Eastern European countries. So if we specifically focus on the effect of CEE on Hungary, this is not so clear. This is, of course, a major interest for Germany to decrease the barriers of trade and investment. But if you understand the role of Hungary within this manufacturer cooperation with Germany, you will see that actually CEE cannot really directly offer too much for Hungary. So Hungary has no globally competitive companies. So our small and medium-sized, we call Hungarian companies, are lack of capital, lack of knowledge, lack of access to the Chinese market. So they are even not competitive in the closed markets. So not to mention China. So for this point of view, CEE is not necessary for us to conclude. And for the multinational companies, this means we decrease the barriers in China. So therefore, technically, we create a competition in China for competition in China who are competing for German FDI. So for the German manufacturer companies, this would decrease the barriers, and probably this can in short term boost our export via the value chains, but in the longer term, it seems quite likely that the Central Eastern European suppliers will be replaced by Chinese companies. So so the outcome is not so obvious from this point of view. So there is a risk that Chinese companies will create a competition for Central Eastern European countries, and especially if you recall this complex structure, especially on the Chinese market. Of course, I'm more optimistic about the European market. We have a lot of advantages to still provide major suppliers for Germany and European markets, but it is quite clear that in the longer term, this can create competition. China can be a major, Chinese suppliers can create competition for the Central Eastern European suppliers as well. So that's the reason I would say that would be, again, a very oversimplified answer to just focus on the German factor. So therefore, I would last the third perspective, which I think the most important, that CEE, okay, at least for some of the observers in Hungary, helps to maintain a relationship with China, because there are several external factors which are putting pressure on this relationship. And this is obvious. This was mentioned by Professor Liu. This was also mentioned by Marcin. And I agree with Marco that it would be nice to find a balance between competition and cooperation. But at the current level, it's hard not to see that we are entering or marching toward a kind of a new Cold War. And from this point of view, this is a nightmare scenario for Hungary. So if we are talking about a new Cold War, this means decoupling, and decoupling for a really open open economy like Hungary has is a kind of a possibility which is they try to avoid. So therefore, it's quite easy to understand why China is a crucial player in this complex system. What we have a cooperation with the German manufacturing sector, and taking out China from this complex relationship would cause clear economic damage for the Hungarian economy. And if you are a politician making or having economic problems, also means that you will have to face political consequences. So that's I think a kind of a major takeaway from this point of view, that in many cases the investment agreement between China and the EU can be seen through these very simple political lenses. Do we want to maintain a relationship? And of course, then comes the details, how this relationship should go on. But this is a very crucial element, that if we are entering to a new Cold War, what kind of economic and political damage can it cause to cut the ties with China? So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm of course looking forward for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you very much for your clear attitude to CAI from a Hungarian perspective. Now, let me introduce our final speaker from CAS, Professor Ye Bing. He is associate professor and the director of Department of EU Law of Institute of European Studies at Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And Professor Ye Bing will give us a presentation based on the perspective of international law to the CAI. Professor Ye Bing, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and I'm glad to be here to share my observation on the CAI and in the context of the EU's new initiatives, and to observe the opportunities and the challenges. And I noticed the time is limited, so I put some more main points here. And the first point is with high level of openness and regulatory neutrality, the CAI will provide European investors greater market access, such as the manufacturing, automotive sectors, private hospital, etc., as our European colleagues mentioned. And once the agreement comes into force, I think the European enterprises, not American, Japanese, or British counterparts, will be racing to be the first to occupy those markets in China. So with high expectation on contribution for EU schools. And the new legal relations established by the CAI, EU and China would also conduct a new cooperation mechanism, including dialogues, consultations, exchange information, or enforcement cooperation to sort down both concerns, such as the concerns on state-owned enterprises, subsidies, environment and labor protections, and etc. And of course, the challenges faced on China may also raised not only from the pressure of the obligation and the CAI, but also from the recent unilateral or autonomous measures proposed by the European Commission or the European Parliament, especially the new Foreign Subsidy Instrument and the Due Diligence Act of German or the European Parliament, which would have a chilling effect on Chinese investment in the EU. I think maybe the new instrument may disappoint Chinese investment to invest Europe in the future. Firstly, I want to go over the core commitments of the CAI, and I think it's very high level openness and regulatory neutrality. There are three core comments of the CAI: market access, is gas plus commitments, and the second is the level playing field, and actually implicitly ensuring the principle of competitive neutrality. And third core commitment is the sustainable development, including corporate social responsibility, the level of protection on investment-related environmental issues, and also the pursue ratification of the fundamental International Labour Organization Convention number 99 and number 105. And after I tried to compare the text of the CAI with the CPTPP, the EU-Japan EPA, and the EU-Vietnam FTA, and the CETA, and found some very interesting things I want to share my observation with our colleagues here. And in terms of the market access, I think it's more commitment to remove barriers than that of the CPP. The most interesting thing is the more commitment proposed by the EU and China to eliminate the performance requirement. There are 10 commitments, and in the CPTPP, there are only 9, and the CETA or EU-Vietnam FTA, there are only 7. And there are 3 special commitments to prohibit. For example, the headquarter requirement. That means the China government could not ask the international company or the European company to set a headquarter in China, or asking the research and development requirement, or ask the company, the European company, to buy or to use domestic Chinese technology, etc. So it's more commitment than that of the CPTPP. And another commitment is about senior management and board of director. Under the CPTPP, they're owning the restriction on the senior management, but not on boards of the director. And so here we can see that there is a different, the CAI make more commitments than that of the CPTPP. And in terms of the level playing field, I want to focus on the definition of the so-called covered entity. And compare the different FTA or EPA, etc., I found the definition of the covered entity is the most comprehensive. It's covered state-directed or state-controlled enterprises. And this definition is broader than that of CPTPP or EU-Japan EPA. And the discipline on state-owned entities is ambitious, but also with proper feasibility. That's very interesting because under CAI, the commercial consideration obligation owning committed in such way in the territory of the party. That means the Chinese enterprises could going global to use the regulatory space, and also the non-discriminating treatment only to the covered enterprises, now to non-contracting party. There is this is a feasibility for Chinese enterprise, strong state-owned enterprises. And in terms of the sustainable development, I think there are three points should be ready to notice. Is that there is a dialogue and cooperation mechanism. It's also to implementing mechanism, and the CAI also to give a commitment to ratification, to ratify the ILO Fundamental Convention number 29 and number 105. As we know, the number 29 convention is now ratified by the United States and China too. And the CPTPP, there is no such kind of commitments. So we can see the CAI is a high level of openness and regulatory neutrality. But the problem is also raised in context of the recent investment-related initiative of the EU, which are integrated trade policy, competition policy, and industry policies of the European Union. For example, the FDI screening mechanism, and it expanded from traditional security to economic security with high technology competition, and disguised by pure economic purpose, which might be incompatible with the existing case law of the European European Court of Justice. And then another very concerned EU legislation is the foreign subsidies instrument. I think it could exclude de facto Chinese state-owned or private enterprises from the EU market. And it will result in the CAI being a unilateral treaties in practice. And another initiatives such as international procurement instrument and due diligence legislation is more concerned about the trade and not investment, but with chilling effects for Chinese investors. And I'd like to make my conclusion here. The first is about the significance of CAI for China. It's very high level, and which assists to build the new development paradigm of China, and it shows determination and ambitions to reshape the relation between the public authority, the right of the government, and the power of the market. And that means to ask the Chinese government to restrain the right to regulate, such as non-commercial activities of state-owned enterprises, or cover the entity used in the CAI, or disciplines on domestic regulation, transparency of subsidies. It's huge obligations for Chinese governments. It also means the market economy principles enshrined under the CAI, and including the competitive neutrality. And the Chinese government and also give huge commitment on improving environmental and labor protection. And I think it's a lot of obligation need China to reform. We code with institutional openness. That means institutional reform and institutional openness. So-called the second round of internationalization after China's accession to WTO. And the second significance for China is to reduce the risk of decoupling and be comprehensively integrated into world markets and economy. And also the CAI paved the way to for China to join CPTPP because it's a very high level of openness and regulatory neutrality. And of course, it's give fundamentation to launch EU-China FTA negotiation in the future. But the challenges of opportunities and challenges here, I think, under CAI, China promised to open up its investment market and accept high-level modern international investment rules, so that international trade relations right now is not so good. Will return to the global track of rule-based globalization instead of power-based globalization. And I think the CAI is not only ambitious, but also practical and feasible. And regarding the CAI, have reached on very difficult issues such as state-owned enterprises and sustainable development clauses. it lay a rule-based foundation, as I mentioned, to launch EU FTA negotiation. For China, it's very difficult to reform, of course. How to implement the legal obligation of the CAI? The focus is to properly handle the relations between the institutional reform and the new round of opening up. In this regard, the CAI itself brings both opportunities and the risks. And by implementing the CAI, I think for Chinese market, it will make the Chinese market more fairer, more transparent and rule of law. And the level of labor and environmental protection will be improved, and the international standards, and which will help high quality development of the economy and society in China. However, the EU's recent legislative measures aim to contain Chinese enterprises in the EU, especially the proposal on foreign subsidies. And I think it will disappoint in Chinese investors' expectation on the function of the CAI. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Ye. Thank you very much for your very clear and excellent presentation. Now we are entering into the question and answers sessions. Because of the limitation of time, maybe we just only one or two comments or questions from audience or other panelists. Anyone want to say something to this discussion?
Can I ask a question?
Oh yeah, yes, you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Victor, I enjoyed your talk very much. The perspective of the Hungarian side is very interesting. Is it the same for other countries in the region?
Thank you very much, Margot. I think except Poland. So because Poland have a very different perception on this, because if I understand well, but maybe Marcin can straighten this, Poland is not try to not just to speak from a national point of view, but also on the European level as well. But for the individual member state, perception on this can be very similar. So we are in a very complex relationship with Germany, and yeah, that's the situation. What we have to deal with it. So it's not, there is no independent China policy in the Central Eastern European region, and it's always Germany. And as Professor Lee also mentioned, now it is also the United States. So it's impossible to have an independent individual China policy in this part of the world, as I see.
Any question or comments? Professor Rigidi.
No. The last comment by Professor Ye Bin put on the table the real question, how to have institutional openness and how to build a new governance consistent with the general commitments of all the states about to create a new economic model. So my question is, what kind of framework we are using for CAI? Because to support the success of CAI, we must operate in a more general framework that take in consideration the real difference of among different capitalistic models that we represent. Each of us is living in different capitalistic models. and to avoid what Professor Liu Zucchi emphasized, the conflicts, or Victor, the new Cold War. We have to put on the table all the initiative in which the states are making agreements for new sustainable order. So I understand well that many trade treaties or investment treaties are blocked from one side, but I see from other side that all the states go in the same direction and do more general framework concerning the development. So work in this direction. Come with Chinese delegation in Europe, in Hungary, or in Italy, or in Germany, and explain what are your strategy for sustainable development. And we explain what are the new norms that we have in Europe. So let's work to create a general framework, useless, what is the institutional openness, to design new rules and to make a more favorable context for the agreement concerning investments. It's your turn, Victor, with your institute. It's your turn with Chinese-CEE Institute. Let's enlarge the spectrum of our reflections. This is, otherwise we may continuously close defending protection, and we must find another way.
Professor Li Ye and Professor Liu, do you want to have a response?
Yes, I agree with Professor Richard Marco. I think it's very important to notice the principles and in the CAI. I think I mentioned about the principle of market economy. I think is according to the CAI is I think the model, different model is find a solution to resolve their solution. It's the very beginning. It's the first step. It's hard to conclude right now. It's something the last resolution, but I think it's the beginning to resolve the different market economy, the model. Chinese also think we are a market economy. European and is another kind of so I think under the CAI we can find a solution. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you all of the participants. I hope this was a good session. It is for you as it is for us. Thank you again. And now for the limitation of time, we have to enter the final session. Our colleague Damash Bayrani and Professor Chen Xin will give the closing speech. Welcome.
Sorry, Chair, but to be frank, I'm searching for Tomasz, and I'm not sure that he's online now. So I tried to call him as well, but I could not. So would you mind, because I'm one of the organizers, so in this case to close, or should because from the Hungarian side, probably in this case I will close our seminar if you do not mind. Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank all the speakers, because this was really a fascinating discussion, and I really believe that we need this kind of open discussion with open attitude, and this is very fruitful to see the different perceptions of these questions as well. Also legal perspective, also member state perspective, the top countries perspective like Germany, and also of course the different perceptions of China has in this regard. And just to straighten my previous message, that of course it would be very extremely oversimplified the situation not to see that there are several tensions also between the United States and China, and these have, of course, a reflection on Europe. So these challenges are there, but I think we, as just to also respond to Marco, that we have to maintain the dialogues in order to understand each other's position better. So, and I think our institution, the Institute for Affairs and Trade, and also the China-CEE Institute is also both institutes which are really interested to maintain this dialogue for. And here I have to thank for our partner to help us to make this seminar happen. And I don't want to consume your time more, just to pass the floor to Professor Chen. So thank you again also for our partner, the China-CEE Institute, and also for all the speakers to being here with us today. Please, Chen.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. I would like to say thanks to all the presenters, speakers, and also those who had raised the questions and provided comments. So I fully agree with Esther Hai that this is a very fascinating seminar, and we had discussed a lot of issues. I think it's a serious seminar, one of the serious seminar, not the first one, and I do believe this is not the last one on the CAI issue. And I think after the more than 3 hours discussion, everybody would be tired. I'm sorry, the moderator asked me to open my video, but unfortunately, not at the moment, I'm using the web, so I cannot open the video screen. I'm sorry for that. So it would be lucky that you can still hear from me, because at the start we had some technical problems with the Zoom meeting. So by conclusion, I would like to raise several facts for today's basic facts for today's discussion. The first fact is the CII, or initially BIT, had been initiated by the European side. And the most meaningful, I think, during today's discussion, it is also a fact that there is a better market access for the European enterprises than for the Chinese enterprises. So this is first fact. And the second fact is that actually this is CAI is a legal agreement long-waited, not only for the 7 years negotiation, but also almost for more than 30 years. So if we recall back for the start of the China-EU relationship starting from the 1970s, we had a very simple trade agreement. And in the 1980s, we had updated for the trade and economic cooperation agreement. And since then, we have no further update for the economic relationship in the context of the legal framework. So CAI is the one which had been waited for a long time. So during the more than I think in the in the first 10 years of this century, there is also another negotiation we call the Partner Cooperation Agreement, PCA. But at the end, it goes to the no end because it's a complex, not only with the trade economic issues, but also with the political issues. And now at the moment, it is better to have a deal than have no deal. And from today's discussion, it seems that several speakers already mentioned the political background or the political factor for the CI. I think if the political factor had been over-highlighted, then it will be a very bad luck for this long-term effort for the negotiation. And the third fact is that China has its own reform and openness schedule. So the CAI is not the first ambitious Chinese trade or the investment agreement negotiation. And also, this is not the last one. Today's meeting, today's seminar, we had also mentioned the CPTPP. So that means we have our own opening schedule and reform program. So either the CAI will be approved or not by the European side. We will on our way for the openness and reform. And so time will prove who will benefit more. And the last point is that it is also a fact. EU is a complex. You have 27 member states with diversified interests. If you would like to talk with one voice, at least in the trade and investment domain, then you should prove that you really can speak in one voice. So that's my short comments. And thanks again for everybody's patience to stay for the more than 3 hours long discussion. And in the name of the Institute, China-CEE Institute, and with cooperation with the Institute for Foreign Trade and Foreign Affairs and Trade, I would like to thank all of you. And in this year, we will have the other events, seminars, and we're looking forward to see you on the other occasion. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.